This is the May 28 edition of Breaking the Line, the ECNL podcast, featuring ECNL President and CEO Christian Lavers and ECNL Vice President and Chief of Staff Doug Bracken. The ECNL podcast is about you and for you, so if you have questions, please submit them to info@theecnl.com. With assistance from our podcast production lead, Jacob Bourne, and our videographer, Reed Sellers, who brings the podcast to YouTube, I am Dean Linke, the podcast editor, and Colin Thrash puts the final touches on the production. Today, Christian and Doug talk about the youth to pro player progression, including the fact that it is extremely difficult to make it to the professional ranks, with the reality that only 1% of all youth athletes will play pro. They look at Euro Academy to Pro rates as well as MLS Academy to Pro rates and share some success stories within the ECNL. This week's ECNL podcast once again hits the topic of, quote, winning matters, end quote. And with the help of Jacob Bourne and some well-sourced data, Christian and Doug break down some 2024 analytics leader versus actual champion information for major sports leagues like the NFL, the MLB, the NHL, the NBA, and MLS. And since we covered so many sports, Doug Bracken's Brain Buster, which will include Reed, Jacob, Christian, Doug, and myself, will ask us about our number one favorite sports team, any sport at all. So it's another fun yet topical show, and it begins right now with ECNL President and CEO Christian Lavers.
All right, thank you, Dean. Doug, good to see you again.
You too. It's been 2 long weeks.
I think everything feels like long weeks when you get into late May, early June, end of the year, end of school year, vacation time, playoff time, event time, crazy time. Everything feels like it's longer.
That was kind of a joke because I see you pretty much every day.
That is true. It doesn't mean it goes fast.
That's for better or for worse, if you will. But yes, I agree with you. This time of year, school's wrapping up, getting ready to get into the summer stuff. And exciting stuff for us, obviously, with the playoffs and the culmination of the season, but and warm weather, which you always experience because you live in San Diego.
Beautiful place. End of the season this time of year also, because today we're going to talk about a lot of things around this pro pathway, pro soccer thing. And obviously last weekend had a promotion match with Sunderland coming back and earning promotion in a game that was worth up to, I see numbers saying $300 million worth of value in winning promotion into the Premiership. So that's a pretty valuable set of goals they scored in the last 20 minutes or whatever it was to get promoted.
That's a lot of money, $300 million. If that's the value, that's a good day at the office.
According to Gemini, I think it was 170 to 300 million. That's a nice wide range, but the point is hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue associated with that win. So we have the Liverpool winning the Premier League. I think Napoli won Serie A. You got all sorts of fun stuff. Got Champions League final coming up this coming weekend. It should be pretty exciting.
Don't forget about the Conference League final on Wednesday. That is Real Betis and Chelsea.
I'm less excited about that one.
People don't care about that as much. Will PSG finally win the Champions League?
I don't know, but I do have a question of how many different levels of European football can you play in before people don't care? Because the Conference League is the third level, correct?
It is the third level. I don't know. I don't hear a lot of people talking about the Conference League final, let's say. So maybe people don't. I'll watch the game because I do that. I watch the game because it's interesting to me.
It's a trophy. Hey, speaking of Crystal Palace, first trophy, a major trophy in club history, I believe.
That was awesome. To me, that is like when you talk about the FA Cup and, I guess to some degree the Carabao Cup was similar because Newcastle hadn't won a trophy in quite a long time. To me, those are like the most fun where it's and Jacob rightly just said in the chat here, Tottenham Tottenham winning the Europa League.
How about that? The Europa League final, which correct me if on my numbers, but it's something like the 16th versus 17th spot in the Premier League.
Yes, they were in fact in 16th and 17th place at the time. That is correct.
Competing for a Champions League spot by winning the Europa League. I didn't think it was a great game, to be honest, but
Yeah. No, it was not a game for the soccer aficionado,
or
but
for the neutral. It wasn't
yeah,
that exciting for the neutral.
if you're a Tottenham fan, you're ecstatic. Do you think because Tottenham did finish 17th, just above the relegation crew? Does Ange, their Tottenham coach, does he keep his job? Seems like he's gonna.
He does win things in his second year. I would be curious what he says about his third year because it seems pretty prophetic.
Yeah.
Well, so all of this talk, and we randomly walk around all these pro leagues because is a segue to the discussion today, or at least the first discussion of youth to pro pathways, because it is something that people talk about with much emotion, much excitement, I think much misinformation about those pathways. And we wanted to dive into a little bit about the actual realities of becoming a pro soccer player and some of the information that we do have on that. And, there's probably a lot of information we don't have, but we have good information on how hard that path is from very credible sources. So let's talk about this. I think Jacob, you had said a couple of podcasts ago, based on a survey that you had found, that 75% of parents think their kid will move on to play professional. Is that professional sports or professional soccer?
That is professional sports, and it comes from a Stephen Borelli column in USA Today that was published in April.
I mean, let's just stop at that for a second, Doug. And the absolute lunacy of that statistic is mind-boggling to me.
I mean, 75% is a lot of people. I think I was pretty sure that I could be a pro till I was maybe 20. Is
I
that
mean, your Uncle Rico, Doug.
yeah,
You probably would have been if Coach would have put you into the state championship
yeah,
game, but he didn't.
yeah. No, but now living it as a parent, as you are as well, your kids are younger than my kids. You realize that's a long shot and like a long shot because actually the actual number is something like below 1%, right?
Yes, and we're going to unpack that here a little bit based on some of the data that we do have. But so if you start with 3 out of 4 parents, and at least that survey, I don't know if there was a uniquely diluted group of parents that was involved in that survey, but 3 out of 4 think their kid is going to play pro sport when the reality is less than 1 in 100 are going to move on. That's a pretty big disconnect. And if there's that big of a disconnect, unfortunately, that means it's ripe for misuse in terms of people selling dreams. And I think one of the things we wanted to talk about, and I mean, let's start at the top domestically, and then we can maybe look at some numbers in Europe as well. But Jacob had pulled up again some numbers from October of 2024, and this was talking about the number of players that have moved on to MLS from MLS Next Pro. Correct, Jacob? Am I
Yep,
citing that correctly?
it's the number of first team signings.
First team signings in MLS from MLS Next Pro. So MLS Next Pro, in theory, is supposed to be the second division of MLS or the developmental pipeline. And again, this is as of October 2024. 120 players from MLS Next Pro had signed first team contracts since 2020, which is approximately, if we do the math, 120 divided by 4. It's about 30 players a year, which averages out to about 1 player per team going from the second division of MLS in their pipeline into the top. And by the way, And we start there because you got to be pretty good to get just to that point. I mean, you're one step away, in theory, by their own pyramid, one step away from MLS if you are an MLS Next Pro. You agree with that logic, Doug?
Yeah. Yeah. It is, uh, yeah. I mean, I think that is in line with what we just said. I mean, it's a very, very low percentage that get there.
Um, and that is again, those are you probably have a wide range of ages of people that are playing in MLS Next Pro. You might have some late teens. You're going to have some probably early 20s in there. I'm a little bit getting ahead of my skis on that, but my sense is that there's a range there. But then if we back it up and you say if that's what's happening at MLS Next Pro, and that number may increase. I think we had just seen before going on here that as of April of this year, that number was somewhere around 160. So a few more, which actually is not, if you go from 24 to 25, the average of 30 per year going from 120 to 160 is 40 more. So it's somewhat in line of that,
Yeah.
average of the previous 4 years. Um, but that, if we take that as saying generally you're at your older teenage years at a minimum, if you're at MLS Next Pro, and Jacob, maybe if you can find some info while we're talking about what the average age of MLS Next Pro is, that would be interesting. But then you go down and you say, okay, if that's the older teenage group, and then you go down to let's talk about where does the pro pathway, and I put that in quotes, start, and you have U13, U14. You have pro academy teams, and we'll talk a little bit about what goes on in those age groups in a little bit. And I think it is our statement that the younger you go and you feel you're on a pro pathway, the higher the chances of you becoming a pro or the closer they are to zero. And, we have some data here, and I'm going to shift now to data from Europe, from the European Club Association in a report they published a few years ago. And it was talking about the percentage of minutes played in the first team by club trained players. And so the intent here is, players that were considered to be in that club's academy. And the interesting part for this, and this was a analysis done from 2021 to 2023, is they considered players in the club from the ages of 15 to 21. And before we talk about the numbers,
So if I came to Christian Lavers FC Pro Club when I was 20, and then
you
I
would
get
be considered a
a
club
club
trained
trained
player.
player. Okay. So
Because
that's,
assuming you didn't sign directly and play
yeah.
in the first team, right? You
Yeah.
were in the reserve team or whatever. But so before we talk about what these minutes and the percentages say, the minimum age, the lowest age that they even consider in determining these percentages is age 15, and they go all the way to age 21. And actually, I'm going to pause here because Jacob just sent some information, so we'll tie it back up. Average age of starting 11 in MLS Next Pro, the average is 21.8. Youngest average age is 18.2. I think that's Houston Dynamo. Oldest 25, Chattanooga. So you have, let's just use that as a range, kind of what we thought. There may be some teens in there. There's not a lot of teens in there.
Well, and there's different priorities between Chattanooga FC and Houston Dynamo.
Correct.
Sure.
Houston's probably trying to develop younger players. Chattanooga may be trying to win more.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, we look at that and say, okay, again, that is, you are a pro in theory in MLS Next Pro, but that is older teen years at a lowest number. And then we go to this European data that doesn't even consider a kid at age 13 or 14 as being relevant. And I ask the question, well, if they don't include those in the percentages, there's only one reason why you don't include those in those percentages is because if you include 13 and 14, the percentages will drop precipitously. Now, at the other end, you look and it says it goes all the way up to age 21. If you're 21 here, I believe most people graduate college somewhere around 22, right?
Yeah, 21, 22.
21,
Yep.
22. So you're a senior in college,
Yeah.
right? And they consider that in this report as club trained. And, here in the US, I mean, club soccer is basically considered done, or at least the youth side of it, the operations we all think about is at age 18. So there's 3 more years of players included in this. So if you look at those two things and say you eliminate 13 and 14 because the odds of you signing as in a pro pathway at age 13 or 14 and becoming a pro, the odds of that happening are about as close to zero as you can get. And
Yeah.
there's always an exception, but that exception doesn't change the odds. And then if you add in players of age 19, 20, and 21, you have a significantly higher number of those players because they're older, they're more mature, their performance is more proven, they're more experienced. A much higher percentage of them are likely to make it. But even when you skew your data, and this is from the report, and it ranges dramatically here, and they pick one club per country that they chose to share. So highest, Atletico Bilbao in Spain. And we know, and to play for Athletic Bilbao, you must be Basque. So they limit their player pool dramatically to begin with. Athletic Bilbao, by far the highest, 50% of their first team minutes were players that trained in the Athletic Bilbao academy between the ages of 15 and 21. It's pretty good,
Yep.
right? The lowest, Inter Milan, was at 0.1%.
Yep.
That's that we don't need to know much. No, that's not very high. The average of the clubs and there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11 clubs here that I put together from Ajax, Athletic Bilbao, Inter Milan, Olympic Lyonnais, Rangers, Sporting, Anderlecht, Fenerbahce, Malmo, Rebel Salzburg, HNK Rijeka out of Croatia. The average was 23% of their first team minutes from club trained players based on the ages of 15 to 21. And so our concept on that is if you had a sliding scale, basically, the younger you sign, the closer to zero you are in terms of a chance of being a pro. And if you extend that all the way up to the age of 21, it gets much, much higher. But that is not the perception that I think most people have.
I do think that we want to consider or have to consider that I think there are clubs that have different priorities. So if you look at that European model, you would say anyone who watches Inter Milan or knows Inter Milan, their perception would be they're not a developmental kind of club. They have a lot of older folks, a lot of older players, that they have not been totally known, I don't think, for developing players from their youth system into the first team. Whereas you look at a club like Ajax has been really known to do that. So there could be some priority bits to it. I also think it could be translatable to any league, MLS being one of them. What's the club that you would say in MLS has a perception that players that they really put a lot of stock into developing younger players historically? FC Dallas?
Yeah,
Right?
FC Dallas and Philly
Yeah.
Union, probably the two.
Yeah, right. So some of it is about club priority, but to your point, I think the point we're trying to make, or you're trying to make, is that to try to think about a 13 or 14-year-old and project their success or whatever at a potential as a pro is a failed.
Well, to be honest,
non-existent.
It's crazy.
Yeah,
And the data shows that. Objectively, it shows that. And again, to make you reference Ajax, and they're in here, and according to this report, it was 36.5% of Ajax minutes first team from 21 to 23. That's pretty good. Just because if you could have been in the Ajax academy and not made it to Ajax, and you may be playing pro soccer somewhere else.
Correct.
But ultimately, if you're good enough that's the whole point, in theory, of having these academies, is if you're good enough they want to sign you and
Yeah.
keep you in your first team, right? And so,
Or sell you and make a profit.
yeah, yeah.
And I
So,
think again, you look at what like I winning and playing young players are not synonymous with each other, right? So there's some of that, like what what you're dealing with there, you know. So what your priority is, and maybe Ajax's priority was to develop the younger players and sell them, and
well, we don't even need to
whatever. But
venture a
yeah,
guess on priority.
yeah,
What we can say is that it is incredibly difficult that they don't even use age 13 or 14 in the European Club Association in making this report. It would
yeah,
be very interesting to see what the numbers are here. And the point is here, where is this dream of pro? Probably most prevalent right now in American soccer is at age 13 and 14. That's where so many of these kids and families are told, hey, this is a pathway and a pro pathway for you moving forward. And it's exactly where the numbers say it matters the absolute least. And again, somebody's going to say, okay, yeah, but you need 1,000 kids coming in at age 13 to find the one, and that may be true. But then it begs the question of, well,
well, but
what
hold
are,
on,
what are,
yeah, you're not finding them.
well, that is true. Well, I guess it's like investing. If you invest in 100 different businesses, 90 can go bankrupt. If you make it really, really big with a couple of them, it all pays off, right? And
Yeah, yeah,
investing in the tails of, as they say, in terms of probability. But it the issue here is, what is a player giving up in terms of, I think, if you just ask generally about life, whether that's commuting time. I mean, there's stories of players that move across the country, go into, dormitory housing, players that go and live in host families.
yep,
And the odds are, again, they're going to do that. They're not going to make it as a pro. And what at what cost is the question. And I think the answer to that is obviously very personal and up to every family. But it would be interesting to know if people really go into it with open eyes as to what it means to be on a pro pathway at age 14. Very different than what it may mean to be on a pro pathway at age 18.
yeah.
Very different. Um,
Oh,
at
it's
age
yeah.
14, it's like throwing the dice, and it's losing almost
Yeah.
every time.
Well, it's like, yeah, right. It's like throwing 100 dice and trying to get an exact combination, right? So, and I think everybody can tie it together. We talked about it with Doug Lemoff, just the differences of it from a 14-year-old to a 18-year-old, right? Just, psychosocially, mentally, physically, all that stuff. So makes total sense. So yeah, I agree that taking these extreme measures to follow a path at 13 and 14 that more than likely is not going to pan out, is a tough one.
Yeah, and I think that what's interesting to me, and interesting is probably not the right word, because it can be really it's a difficult, there's a lot of confusion and misinformation. But when you start with the fact that less than 1% of players ever are going to make it there, and then you go to the basically mathematical almost guarantee. And yes, if you can point to the one or two kids that are the exception, that's sort of proving the point, right? Because
Yeah,
there's always going to be an exception. If you know the name, that's proof that's exception. If there was a lot of them, you wouldn't know all the names because you could rattle through a bunch. But when it's almost zero, but it does increase every age, it begs the question: and how do you set up the best possible identification pathway that requires less drastic
yeah,
decisions, less risk and it does the and it and requires the risk, because at some point you have to take a chance, but it requires it at older age groups, and to some degree reducing the size of the risk as much as possible. And I don't think if people knew the numbers, they'd probably be more inclined to solve a problem that way. When you don't know the numbers, everybody just jumps in and asks questions later. It's a ready, shoot, aim
Yeah.
type thing, as opposed to saying, hey, let me be sober minded in terms of what the future may hold at these ages and be a little bit more careful about these decisions until there becomes, I don't want to say guarantees, because I think that's hard when you're proving, you're in a proving ground type situation, but where at least the risk, the failure percentage drops somewhat substantially, I would hope, and the consequence of failure drops to some degree.
Yeah. Yes, we could have a more thoughtful um, way to set this up for kids that age than we do for sure. I agree with you. Making these drastic, decisions. I just try to think about where else is there a parallel you can see anywhere else in major sports where it happens like that? I mean, tennis, maybe?
Maybe I don't know tennis,
Like where you're
but
playing all these, you're going everywhere and playing all these junior tournaments and all that stuff. That's an individual sport, but
yeah, and I
maybe
think to
tennis?
be fair, what I do know about tennis is if you are a highly ranked player, you're pretty much not in school as a
Yeah.
youth player because you have to travel to all these places. I mean, I think it's probably makes other sports look cheap in comparison to it. But you would say it certainly doesn't seem that way with the more traditionally American sports, in
Yeah.
football, baseball. Now, hockey's different, right? Hockey, you have that interim, what do they call it? It's not the bantams, or they
It's
go
like,
into that sort of semi-pro
yeah, yeah.
step before they go to college, before they go to the NHL, and that usually hits players, hockey players, somewhere around 16, I think, where they have to start looking at going into sort of I hate the word semi-pro, so let's just call it
It's called
amateur.
major junior hockey. It's
Okay.
16 to 20 years old.
Okay.
That's
So
right.
you do that, and that is a step. But again, if it's 16 to 20, that's more in line with the percentages.
Yeah.
So to your point, I mean, you certainly don't have the Green Bay Packers under 13 football team with future Aaron Rodgers on it.
Yeah, and I think if you tie it back to soccer, European soccer, let's say, more oftentimes than not, at 13 and 14, like you're going to the club that's closer to you, right? There's not because
But
they
that's not how it's done here because there's
right,
some of that, but there's a lot
right,
of these that are recruiting players from everywhere.
because you can't sign a pro contract until you're 16, I think, in Europe, right? I think that's
I'm
I
not
think
sure
that's
where.
right.
I know there's a difference in England between how far you can recruit. So I think at
Yeah.
15 and below, you are limited geographically.
Yeah.
And at 16, there's a dramatic shift in rosters because all of a sudden you can recruit. I don't know if it's country-wide or EU-wide or whatever it is,
Yeah.
but the boundary significantly expands. And the quote unquote academy team at under 14 or 15 is dramatically different from that same team 1 year later. And
Right.
don't kill us on whatever the age is, but there is a break on that. And so the point here I think that we're making is there's a lot of confusion here. There is this is an incredibly big hurdle. And at a time like now where everybody talks about pathways and everyone talks about future as a pro, very few are soberly looking at that and saying, what does this mean? As I consider whether my 13-year-old will up and move and live away from home in chasing a dream. And, somebody can turn around and say, well, how can you take that dream away or whatever? And I'm not going to venture any opinion on that. I'm just saying when it's a 1 in 1,000 chance, that's not a bet you take very often in most areas of your life.
And I mean, I think it's important. What are the costs? Right.
Correct.
And I don't mean the financial costs. I mean,
Yeah.
just the
Opportunity
cost
costs. Yep.
of,
Yep.
yeah.
Life.
So there's certainly something to think about. Yeah.
So
Agreed.
I'm gonna transition that because I think we hit that hard.
Can I interrupt and just
Y-
give you a word from our sponsors first?
I think you can.
Thank you. Christian, I always appreciate. I don't know. I think maybe we got to work on our segues to the sponsors, but
As long as it's polite, I think it's good.
It is. Thank you, Christian, for allowing me to recognize our sponsors. Let's start with Quick Goal. The ECNL is pleased to announce Quick Goal as the official goal provider and partner for ECNL girls and ECNL boys, a new partnership created to support the growth and development of the country's top players, clubs, and coaches. At all national events, including national playoffs and national finals, the Quick Goal Coaches Corner will provide hospitality and social space for ECNL girls, ECNL boys, and collegiate coaches. Quick Goal will also be the presenting sponsor of the national championship winning ECNL girls and ECNL boys Coaches of the Year and the ECNL girls and ECNL boys Goals of the Year. Quick Goal looks forward to helping the ECNL continue to elevate the standards of youth soccer and provide more opportunities to players on and off the field in the coming years. Thank you, Quick Goal. And now back to your podcast host.
All right.
Christian.
All right. So again, before somebody yells and says, well, if it's so hard, why does ECNL have a U13, U14, just like anybody else? Because providing a good environment, providing exciting sports competition, and the learning opportunities go with them, let's separate that from saying this is proof of a pathway towards, riches and fame of being a pro athlete. Okay, there's a difference. You can say that 13 and 14-year-olds should be in a great environment, should be learning, should be having fun, should be competing, doing all that stuff that sports hopefully can do, without saying, and that means you're likely to become a pro and therefore do things that you wouldn't otherwise do because you think that there is this big bow with lots of money and fame at the end of this 14-year-old.
Yeah. And part of our job is to guide our 13 and 14-year-olds and help them navigate life as you will. So, and everybody makes their own choice on that matter, but,
which we're a fan of. It's America, the land of the free.
America, I am a fan of it. That's true. It's true.
And speaking of freedom to make decisions, there's been another decision made by MLS Next here at U13 and 14 that has been talked about a lot, but it's basically to eliminate competitive results in standings.
So no standings.
Well, no. Standings.
No wins and losses.
No wins, losses, or ties. Nobody's a winner. Nobody's a loser. There is no score in terms of the way we think of score, which is you put the ball in the net. Everything is ranked based on quality of play. And so I was just watching a nicely produced video that talked about the quality of play. And just so for those catching up, at U13 and U14, there are no standings based on performance competitively in terms of wins and losses. Everything is based on quality of play, which is assessed. I'm not sure if it's assessed by AI. I think it probably is.
It is absolute 100%.
But if it's not,
there's no amount of human hours that can watch that much.
So it's probably AI.
Okay.
And somebody can tell us where we're wrong. But even if it's AI, somebody has to write the AI, which means it is going to be somebody's opinion at some point of what is high quality soccer and what is low quality soccer, so that every action, if we use the football philosophy word, every action, every press, every pass, every dribble, every shot, every positional decision is given a score. The team is given an attacking score, a defending score, and an overall score, all based on quality of play, intention, execution, very vague in some of that. That score is then adjusted to the strength of the opposition. Now, how you do that is another question I would have, because there are no scores. So somehow your strength of opposition is maybe determined by their quality of play. And then that is the standings at under 13 and under 14 in MLS Next now. Not who won and lost, but who has AI say that they played better. I'm going to stop there, Doug, and I'm going to ask you your thoughts on that while I put together my thoughts.
Yeah. I'll be positive, start and say, I think the challenge that we all wrestle with is, how do we develop good soccer? And good soccer is, I would define, and we've talked about this before, I would define as what my vision of the game is and how I think it's, when it's played correctly, this is how it looks. And these are the things that go into making it look that way. And everybody has a different vision of what that is. But if you have one of those, a vision of what it is, then that's it. So I'm going to say this is the challenge. Like, how do we, because I think the biggest thing people say is,
By the way,
we have this
quality of play, Doug, won't take into account your vision.
Yeah, correct.
It's the AI's vision or the person behind its vision.
Yeah, correct. And so, there's a kind of win at all costs mentality that I think people would say gets in the way of development, and they're trying to account for that, to try to bridge that.
You're being very gracious.
I am, but I'm gonna let me finish, because what I'll say is, I think it is the absolute wrong way to go about it. And to me, the right way to go about it is to educate coaches and to get more. That means more access to education, more education that's applicable to the environment that we're in and the realities of that environment, more, pictures and ideas about how to get success at player development and all those things. That's, to me, how you do it. It's almost like standardized testing, right? Standardized testing is tough because, then you're maybe educating to the test, and therefore, is it really learning that's going on, or is it learning so that people can regurgitate the information to do well on a standardized test, right? That's an argument out there in education. And to me, that's how I analogize this. And so I just don't think that's the answer. Like to say, and then to pretend that winning is not part of what competition and sports are is totally
crazy. It's crazy.
It's crazy.
Because, so you will have players who come off a field, lost 3-0, but will say, but we actually won because look at our ideas and our intention in style of play.
Yeah.
And you're sending a message to that kid that the actual reality of what happens is trumped by the subjective intention of what the player tried to accomplish, whether they were effective or not. And, listen, let's assume that there's good intention of, there's different ways of evaluating intention in the penalty box that you're defending versus the penalty box that you're attacking. But I looked at the video that they released this with, and for example, there's a couple of goals, and you score a goal, and then the finish, is the finish good, very good, or excellent? Well, at the end of the day, you scored, and if you put it in the corner, how do we determine whether that was an excellent finish or a very good finish? Let's go old school. In the old school, you either scored or you didn't score because it was saved or you missed the target.
And nobody will remember whether it was a great goal or not a great goal. It was a goal. I mean, I do you think, again, terrible comparison maybe, but do you think Tottenham Hotspur cares that goal they scored in the Europa League final was a own goal or a?
Well, I think Man United took home the quality of play Europa Cup championship.
Is it a bigger trophy or is it smaller?
It's in your mind.
Yeah. I
think you hit it right.
Yeah,
Doug, I think you hit it right. The answer is not creating a false reality of anonymous computerized analytics. The answer is educating coaches who then in turn educate players and families about how you balance the search
Yeah.
for results with understanding where that's a good decision to make or a good effort, even if it doesn't work. It doesn't seem like we need to be, I also would say it's a little bit condescending to me to talk and say at 13 and 14 in this country that people can't, coaches, in theory, of teams that are supposed to be hot in clubs that are supposed to be highly organized,
Yeah.
highly educated, and trained people, that you
Like,
can't actually trust them to
yeah,
teach
right.
these
We
things.
don't
And you,
trust you to develop these guys and do what you're supposed to do. So we're going to tell you whether you're doing it or not.
and I mean, not that we have any history of conspiracy theories turned true over the last 5 years at all, anywhere in this country. But I can't imagine how this system could possibly be weaponized and used against clubs who
Yeah.
run afoul of the AI
Well,
program.
I mean, that's part and parcel to the world we live in. Everything is weaponized. That can be. Yeah, I don't get it really. I do think winning is part of it, and it's part of it that we have to learn both how to do it and how to deal with not doing it and all those kinds of things. So it's always part of it. And if our coaches aren't good enough to manage through that and still develop players at a high level or the level they need, then we need to educate more coaches and make it accessible and affordable and all the things that go along with it. Not, it's, it's not reverse engineering it by saying, by me giving you the score of good or not good based on your vision of what the game should be. And I don't know enough about it to say, what the algorithm says is good or not good and whether I agree with whether that's good or not good.
Well,
To me,
by the way, it's probably impossible to know that because it's got to be a very sophisticated algorithm to do all this stuff. But then ultimately, how do you really learn much as a player then? Because you don't know too much. I suppose you can pull some data that said this decision the AI said was a good decision, and this thing the AI said was a bad decision. I don't know.
I could see using it as a tool for development, like to say, like after the fact, let's look at this. And I mean, this is coming and happening, right? Where AI will take the video that we capture and break it down for individual players, and all that kind of stuff is already happening. So I think it could be used as a tool.
You know what this sounds like, Doug? It sounds like, remember those old tournaments where after you tied on points and tied on goals for and tied on goal difference, who went on was based on who got more yellow cards or a sportsmanship rating by referees. Do you remember that?
I will say one year we made it to the USYS final and we won the fair play award, but we did not win the final.
Well, and there are tournaments
that
where
that didn't feel great.
you advanced based on your sportsmanship rating by the referees, right? When everything else
Yeah.
was tied. It seems like this is, I mean, maybe sportsmanship on this should be weighted into the quality of play. That'd be part of whether it's a good game or not, right? As people
Yeah.
are sporting.
I think the big question
Tongue in
that,
cheek, of course.
yes, tongue in cheek. The big question we're trying to tackle is how do we increase the importance of the development of players to play good soccer that translates into them being the best players they can be, whatever that
Well, the
means.
answer to that, Doug, is what you've already said, which is education. And education comes with experience. I'm not talking about, from an ivory tower. I'm talking about there's probably some stuff that can be formal licensing, and it's sort of those moments where you get to jump through the hoops, but you learn theories and you learn, case studies and benchmarking. Then it's informal mentoring of people who are teaching you. This goes back to some of what we talked about before and some of the
Yeah.
challenges of coaching in that, but it's always easier to pronounce a solution and then market the solution
I
and
was
then
going to
make money
say,
from your solution. And
I would,
that's what this screams
yeah,
to me. This is not about improving soccer. This sounds like a way of saying we've solved development. Here's the way we're doing it. Now let's push this out on a gullible marketplace.
yes, I was going to say that this smells of marketing to me of, hey, those guys over there, they're not analyzing your play and whether it's good, very good, or excellent. And we are, you know.
Well, and by the way, you
So it
said
could be a
it.
marketing ploy. I mean, and all marketing is, everybody uses marketing at some point and some level. And we've talked about it, a bunch on this. And, it feels more like that than anything to me. I don't know.
And to your point, I think there could be, and this is not intended to be disrespectful of the technology. There could be some valuable uses of this technology in pulling clips and evaluating various decisions,
Yeah.
but it is not in place of objective reality. It's like turning soccer into virtual reality headsets. And that is a complete misuse of this that I think will have unexpected collateral consequences of when you can't look and figure out. By the way, not to mention there's going to be a whole black market of standings now. Somebody in some social channel is going to be
Oh
putting
yeah.
up the black
Oh yeah.
market under 14
This is
standings of real scores.
this is like gym class with no jump rope. We're going to have an imaginary jump rope so that nobody feels what it's like to trip and fall when you can't jump
Did
rope.
you ever do that? By the way, did you ever have somebody do a training where you imagined to pass the ball back and forth?
My guy, I grew up in the 80s. So no. Some great time in music.
It's also very interesting to me that this is at the age groups that we also just talk about how they're completely, the odds of you being a pro and signed as a 13-year-old are zero, but now you're also not competing. You're in quality of play analytics land. Now, the other thing, and Jacob pulled up this, which I thought was really interesting because everybody can say, okay, yeah, youth soccer, youth sports, whatever. But Jacob, our intrepid producer here and finder of all things factual, looked up analytics leaders and actual champions in pro sports. And I almost don't want to take the thunder because I didn't do this. So I'm going to ask Jacob if you want to go through. You got NFL, MLB, NHL, and NBA, where you compared the most prominent or one of the most prominent analytics used with who actually won. So Jacob, can I bring you into the podcast to go through what you got here?
Very happy to talk about this. Yeah. So, like I said, I took the analytics leaders of each league and compared to the actual champion. In the NFL, the most widely used stat is DVOA, which is defensive value over adjustment, which is offensive and defensive side of the ball. That leader was the Baltimore Ravens, but the Philadelphia Eagles won the Super Bowl in 2024.
The tush push
And
does not apparently get enough points in this analytics or what?
I mean, if they ran it every single play and were able to get those 10 yards, I'm sure it would. But
I can't
it's a
even make
combination of a
an
bunch of everythings.
I can't make a judgment. I've never heard of these analytics, but that's good
Mhm.
because I just watched the games to see who won. But maybe I
Right.
should experience sports with data more.
MLB, it's pretty standard. WAR, wins above replacement. Team WAR was Philadelphia Phillies, but lo and behold, the Los Angeles Dodgers beat the New York Yankees to win the World Series. In the NBA, the uh, basketball reference uses team net rating, which seems to be the kind of leader in that. That was the Boston Celtics, and the Boston Celtics actually did win the NBA championship. So analytics got that one right. And then in the NHL, Dom Lazuzin at the Athletic, he uses what's called game value score added because there's not really a standard NHL analytics model. His is the best one, though. In 2024, he said the Carolina Hurricanes were going to win the Stanley Cup, and instead it was the Florida Panthers. So out of the four major sports, analytics got one right last year.
Well, and as I think you said in this document, you can debate analytics, but you cannot debate final scores. And
No.
I think this again puts it in place in the same way that you can talk about style of play in our great sport. And, I was talking to somebody the other day, clash of style is actually what makes the most entertaining matches, I think, in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And you can, in determining style, you base your style on personal preference to some degree, but then on also what you think is the most effective metrics that you're going to measure in achieving your style. If you're going to be a counterattacking team, you're going to have different analytics that you're going to look at in order to be
Well,
successful in
I'll
counterattacking.
I'll take it a step further than that, because this is the reality is your tactics change based on who you're playing. So you may one day be a possession oriented team because of the opponent that you're playing and it suits that game or that strategy, and the next game you might sit deeper and play on the counterattack.
Well, and by the way, I'll ask that question, Doug, because in theory, your example is also going to be related to how you the strength of your opponent in some ways. And so if these quality of play ratings are adjusted based on strength of opponent, how do you do that? Does that mean my excellent finish is not excellent because the team I played is not as good? Does it mean my decision to press is not as high a rated decision of pressing because the team I played is less athletic? How do you
I
how do
mean,
you
yeah, if
do
you
that?
applied it that way, I mean, I guess I would ask at 13 and 14, do we change the way we play based
Well,
on
no,
our
I'm
opponent?
just I'm going back to this because I'm saying, by the way, how do we determine strength of the opponent to adjust your score if is it the strength of the opponent and their intentions? And is it the strength, or do we actually, is this a way to sneak back in who actually won?
I don't have a good answer for that question. And not that you're looking for one, because I
I'm
don't have the
not. And
answer.
and again, I think our point here, we could call this the information podcast because our in the first segment, the point was it would be really helpful for people to know the information about what are the odds of success as you sort of take big decisions in life. We would do that in all the rest of our areas of life, right? We weigh risks, rewards, ups
Yeah,
and downs.
yeah,
Um, and in this one, the use of analytics and this type of thing could be really helpful as information to
yeah. It's a
further
tool.
evaluate a performance
Yeah.
and to do things, but it is in no way, shape, and form, in my opinion, in our opinion, appropriate to replace the reality of competition with an analytic formula.
I think what major to varying degrees, but what professional sports has done is they've realized it's not the end all be all. And I talk about analytics, that it's a tool and they use it and there are beliefs in it, but it is a tool. It is not the end all be all. Because if it was the end all be all, every team that had the analytics would win, to Jacob's point, and they don't.
And if it was the end all be all, it would be very, very boring.
Yeah, right. We'd run everything is a computer simulation.
And in theory, we're red pill. Are we red pilled or blue pilled? Red pilled, right?
I get red pilled.
All right. All right. Well, that's enough. That's the conclusion of our two topics
Well, let me
on
just ask.
information.
Yes, just ask you one more thing. Just give me your perspective on winning and losing. I know what you think about all this, but give me your perspective on winning and losing.
In these age groups,
Just generally.
I think winning is a metric that evaluates how effective you are at trying to do whatever it is you're trying to do. And at certain ages, it is a very, very low priority. And at other ages, it is the only thing that matters, right? In pro sports, it's the only thing that matters.
Only thing.
In U8 soccer, would you ever want an 8-year-old not trying to win? No, I don't think so. But when they lose because the other team is bigger, faster, stronger, or the other team just better with the ball, whatever the reason is, do we use that in any negative way? Of course not. It's a metric of they're farther along in the development curve than we are. And I think at age 13, 14, it's very similar. It tells us how effective are we at doing what we're trying to do. And you may say, you know what, we lost that game, but we really, really like the way we played in this, this, and this. But can we ignore the fact that we lost? Like at the end of the day, uh, if we're building from the back and we lose the ball 3 times inside the penalty area and lose 3-0, that's an important data point at how good we are at building from the back. Doesn't mean building from the back is a bad idea. And I hate using that example. We talked about that with Doug Lemoff last week.
Yeah.
But, so to your point, I think winning is always something that's there and it needs to be a factor in evaluating performance as you age. It is more and more important.
Yeah, agreed.
And it is a skill that you need to train.
It is a skill, and it's as much as you get there with your the mental part of the game, and that ability, you know it when you see it, right? Those teams who find a way and know how to win.
Well, and to that is the skill, by the way. The skill is the competitiveness, the perseverance, the grit,
Yeah.
the find that area where you have the advantage.
Yeah.
That you have that's something that's at an individual and collective level, something that you have to train and work at over a long period of time. You don't just flip it on.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed. All right. Great conversation on that. Let's hear from another sponsor before we get to this Bracken Brainbuster for the day. Mark Pro, did you know ECNL provides free recovery sessions? ECNL has partnered with Mark Pro, a staple for recovery in professional sports. Mark Pro is a unique, safe, portable e-stim device that feeds sore muscles and removes metabolic waste. Stop by the recovery zone during your next event. Mark Pro, thanks to Mark Pro for their partnership. All right, is everybody ready? Drum roll. We should get a drum roll in here, Reed or Dean. Let's, for this something snazzy. Okay. This was just my because I'm watching my favorite team that's not a soccer team right now. I wanted to ask everybody, what is their favorite team that's not a soccer team and why? We're going to go with Christian Lavers, who hates all sports
No,
that are not soccer.
I have to go with the mighty Michigan Wolverines football team, undefeated national champions and slayers of Ohio State for
2 years
4
ago.
consecutive years.
Didn't they win the national championship 2 years ago?
1 year ago with 0 losses compared to the Buckeyes' 2-loss season this year.
I bet the Buckeyes trophy is just as shiny.
Is it though?
I bet it is.
I think there's
bet it is.
there's a little blemish. There's in fact 2 of them.
All right, so we got the Michigan Wolverines. It's one of the reasons I don't like Christian that much. Says stuff like that. Let's go to Reed Sellers.
Well, if it says anything about my loyalty, I'm a Tennessee Titans fan. So
Oof.
had our ups and downs, 2018, 19, those were the years. But yeah, that is my team.
Okay, Tennessee Titans, love it. Where did is that because you grew up there?
Oh, and why? Yes,
Yeah.
I grew up in Nashville, so been going to games forever. Yeah.
Reed, were the down years did they lose or were they just analytically down?
Both.
Well, I mean, their style of play was pretty good. Like they had good intentions, good play design. The execution wasn't there. So, I mean,
Wow.
yeah.
All right.
Love that.
All right.
Good
All
answer.
right.
All right, let's go to Jacob Bourne. Definitely going to be a hockey team.
Yep. Outside of
St. Louis Stars.
Close, they were a good soccer team back in the day. And outside of the Europa winning Tottenham Hotspur, my favorite team is the St. Louis Blues. I grew up playing hockey among all the other sports that I did. My mom and dad were both big hockey fans, and so they have been one of my favorite teams ever since I learned how to skate when I was like 18 months old.
Love it. See, that's good stuff. Christian, on the other hand, is from Wisconsin, and his favorite team is Michigan. So nobody knows.
Can't help him there.
I did play hockey a little bit, but I was no good.
Let's
I wasn't
go to the velvety voice, Dean Linke.
I'm a massive NBA fan, though I'm a little bit worried about how much longer I can be. When I lived out in LA, I fell in love with the Lakers with Nick Van Exel, former Cincinnati Bearcat. And then when LeBron went to the Lakers, it even put a further exclamation point on my love. My worry is when LeBron finally does hang it up, and that could be any day now, that I may have to figure something else out, because I don't miss a Lakers game.
Okay. Showtime. Love the Lakers for Showtime. All right, great. I'm going to stay also NBA, huge, grew up in Indianapolis, basketball country. So Indiana Pacers right now, they play game 4 tonight, Eastern Conference Finals.
Big game tonight. Big game.
Big game against the Knicks. Jason Cutney loves the Knicks, so I'm hoping really the Pacers stick it to the Knicks so I can give Jason some crap for that. But always love the Pacers. And interesting story is back in the day, and Dean will remember this, NBA games were only on local TV. They didn't have these national TV contracts. And one of my teachers in high school was the cameraman for Under the Basket of Indiana Pacer games at Market Square Arena. And he asked me to come be his cable tender. So for 2 seasons, I sat under the basket for Indiana Pacer games, which only furthered my love for the Pacers. So there you go. That's my story. That's all I got. And I'm sticking to it.
There you go. Well, that's a wrap on talking about the pro pathway, talking about analytics, talking about very debatable topics. And you got our opinion. And that's what makes this great, is that everybody can have their own opinion and do their own thing. And I actually would say that will move the sport forward by having people that are not in lockstep and in unison in style of play or anything else like that. And
we'll be the disruptors.
We'll disrupt.
We'll be the disruptors. But thank you, everybody, for joining us.